This is Erin from the Etsy shop GameCrafts, and in this video series I will show you how to create a pattern using cross-stitch software from an image or a sprite. So the first question to answer is, what is a sprite? Sprites are images used in video games, usually to represent characters, and they got that name because they float over the background like a ghost or a sprite. So you can find these images just by Googling a specific video game if you want, or a great resource is this site Spriters Resource. You can select what platform you're looking for. Let's go for Super Mario Brothers. So we got NES, S, you can scroll down and see all these games they have on here. Let's do Super Mario 3. Playable characters. And here they have an image of all of these character sprites. Sprites are ideal to use for creating patterns because the images are really crisp and you're able to use 1 pixel per stitch, which just makes creating the pattern really straightforward. If you're going to use an image that is not a sprite, you want to make sure you find one that is preferably a PNG file. JPEGs can have a lot of graininess that's hard to edit out. But you can use them if you find one that's good enough quality. The other thing you want to look for is if there are really fine lines. That's going to be hard to translate into a pattern because the narrowest point you're able to make is a stitch. So if these black lines are 1 stitch wide, this image would need to be really large to maintain the aspect of how thin these lines are to the proportion of the rest of the body. Usually images with thick lines will come out as a much better pattern. One thing to watch out for when you are using images that are clearly someone's art and not from the original game, please contact the artist and ask them for permission to create a pattern from their artwork. That way you can avoid getting into any legal disputes. Once you've found the images you want to use, you'll need to touch them up a bit before trying to import them into pattern making software. If you're using just a sprite, you could use something as easy as MS Paint. I'm going to paste this image here. So if you zoom way in, you can see you pretty much already have the pattern you want. I'll take this Raccoon Mario here, select the part of the image you want, and crop to that, and now you're ready to import that into some pattern software. If you'd like to use more advanced software than Paint, you can use GIMP. It's a free image editing tool similar to Photoshop. This is what it looks like when you open it up. Create a new image and paste here. With a sprite you would pretty much do the same thing, just crop it, and from there you could copy or save it to import it into the pattern software. If you're using an image that is not a sprite, this is where you can decide what part of the image you want to use, clean it up a little bit, and maybe change the size so that it meets the dimensions you want your final project to be. First, let's crop it. Crop to selection. And then we can think about how big our image is. If just hovering this and looking at the pixels down here in the corner, top left is 0, 0, bottom right is about 305 wide. So now you get to do some math. If you're using 14 count fabric, that means 14 stitches are in an inch. So if we have 300 wide at 14 stitches per inch, right now you're looking at a 21 to 22 inch wide project if you were to stitch this image pixel for pixel, which is really, really big. So let's say we want to get it down to more like 10 inches wide. So you'd say, well, 10 inches times 14 per inch, or whatever your thread count is. If I'm using 14 count, 140 stitches would give me the size I'm looking for. So let's resize this image to 140 stitches wide. You can scale image, width 140, and when you click out of that box, it'll automatically adjust. If it has this linked image here, that means it's going to adjust the height and width proportionally, which is what you want, and scale. So we can zoom in a bit to kind of get a sense for what that is going to look like in stitches. Doesn't look too bad. If you want the image to look a bit crisper and not as grainy, you can sharpen it. In GIMP, that's under Filters, Enhance, Sharpen. And you'll choose an amount that you want to sharpen it by. You can go about here, see what that does. Kind of bumps up the contrast a little bit. If you over sharpen it, it'll make it look too choppy. So you can just try different levels of sharpness and figure out what works for you. Another thing you can do here is erase parts that you don't want in your final image. I would change the brush to one that's hard so that you don't get any faded areas. You just want to crop out as much of this, as you care to. Kind of clean up the image a little. And you can always touch it up further in the pattern software. This is just kind of a starting point, so you have less work to do there. You could take the time to erase this background. You can also do that in the pattern software. So I think here's a pretty good starting point. You'll want to export this, not just, well, you can save it too, but saving it will keep it in your image software. Exporting it, you can change it to a PNG or a JPEG, something your pattern software can import. Thanks for watching. Again, this is Erin from the Etsy shop Gamecrafts. Now that you have your image ready, watch part 2 and part 3 to see how to turn that image into a pattern using KG Chart or PC Stitch.